I turned down the very kind opportunity to sit on those chairs which had been borrowed from Blind Date, because I thought I'd look ridiculous. It's very nice to be here at New Zealand House. I've never been inside. I did once get an invitation to go and give a speech in Norwich, which involved me travelling for 3 hours, and when I got there were only two people in the audience, one of whom was the person that had invited me. The other person, I promise you this really happened, he waited until I finished speaking. I asked him whether he'd like to join the cause I was promoting, and he said he would, but it would interfere with the terms of his parole. Anyway, I also noticed outside, you can this building also summarises why the Vietnam War happened. I don't know whether anybody saw that this building is the site on which Ho Chi Minh worked as a waiter, according to the sign outside, so I was quite diverted by it. I'm very pleased to be we're here with Bright Blue, partly to talk to you as an audience and partly as a token of my support for what I think is a very important organisation and an important cause. That is to make the Conservative Party a party that understands the modern world, to inject into British political life the very important strain of the centre-right and of liberal conservatism, to develop ideas for it, and to be a constant voice for it. I always think there are plenty of people who for whom anything the government does can never be enough, it can never be right-wing enough, it can never be robust enough, and any of its achievements are never considered to be satisfactory. And it always reminds me very much of a Jewish story of a woman who takes her son to the beach, and it's very, very windy. And so she dresses him up in a hat and a coat and a scarf, and out they go. And there's a massive wave, and it comes and it sweeps the child out to sea. And the mother's absolutely distraught. She prays to God, please return me my son. And a miracle happens. A huge wave comes back and it drops her son at her feet. And she can hardly believe it. She looks down. She looks up, she looks down, she says, "He had a hat." I think most of you can get the analogy. Yesterday afternoon I was with my mother and she was showing me some of the letters and diaries that her sister had kept when they were in a concentration camp during the war. And it was a letter that had been written by my mother's sister, to my mother's mother to her sister on her 16th birthday about the troubles ahead. And my grandmother didn't survive the war. They were deeply moving documents. And my father was also involved in the war as well. He was son of a man who was put in Starobelsk labour camp, and he himself, when I asked him what school I should send my son to, pointed out that he'd become a professor despite the fact that his secondary schooling consisted of 6 weeks in Trans-Siberian Railway School. And I've always, therefore, when I've been asked whether I bemoan the fact that Britain doesn't have big ideas, responded that I'm quite suspicious of them, because the big ideas drove my family out of their house. They murdered my grandmother. They stole our property. They robbed my parents of their country. They had to then rebuild their lives as immigrants in a foreign land, in a language they didn't speak, and bring up their children there. So I quite like the small things about Britain, the suburbs, the much-hated bourgeoisie, the television sitcoms on the BBC. My grandmother always used to say that while the Queen is safe in Buckingham Palace, we're safe in Hendon Central. And that is a small summary of my politics. I think there's an awful lot to be said for British stability, for the quiet rule of law and order, for lack of hysteria, for moderation, for pragmatism, and all those things are almost as important in my politics as any specific idea or set of ideas. But at the bottom of it, I do have, I think as a result of their experience, a profound love of this country, and also a belief that the modern world keeps getting better. That the pessimism about this country is totally wrong. That we live in an unbelievably prosperous, free, stable country. As a Jew, you often get involved in arguments about Israel, and I just look at the situation for the people who ended up in Israel, as opposed to who were with my mother in concentration camps or with my father exiled, and they look around them at all the countries in the area, and what do they have to pick from? Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. What a country offers them the sort of stability, the prosperity, the freedom that we are able to offer in this country. So I want, just before I even begin actually, to say that we have to be, I think, the most robust contradictors, if that's probably not a word, but it'll have to do, of those people who argue the pessimistic case against this country, who think basically the world is going to the dogs. There are a lot of people who think that, and I think we have to say, not only is the world not going to the dogs, but this country has become more tolerant, it's become more prosperous, it's become more international, it's become more open. We love its mixed nature, we love its openness to the world, we love the cities that it's building, we love the people who live here, we love our stable democratic institutions, and we won't let anybody tell us that this country is declining, that this country doesn't have a future, that this country's been somehow degraded by the people who've come here and by the multi-ethnic society that we're building, that because gay people can get married, that means that this country has somehow lost the idea of stable family life. Those things we are going to counter. It doesn't mean that we're not reformers. It doesn't mean that we don't have moments of worry. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to do anything about the problems that we see in Britain. It doesn't mean that there are people who don't live very hard lives and whose problems are stubbornly difficult to deal with, or that we're not committed with a great degree of energy and compassion as well as creativity to try to do any of those things. But it does mean that we won't accept the idea that Britain is a bad place being run by a sort of secretive political elite that is trying, that while it's not committing child abuse, is somehow driving the country over the edge into a sort of despair. So I'm going to talk about the consequences of this optimism. Just briefly, because I haven't got all morning, you've got many brilliant sessions to come. Because if we're becoming more prosperous, that throws up policy issues for liberal conservatives, for the centre-right to deal with. And I want to talk about the political challenges of the optimism that I am going to talk, that I believe I've already spoken about. Let me start in your hotel room with a little sign that says that they want you to put the towel back on the rack if you want to help the environment. And we all look at this little sign and we say to ourselves, I think they just want me to help with the hotel's laundry bill as we drop the towel back on the floor. Maybe you don't do that, but I possibly do. So some people began to wonder, what could we put on this sign that would increase the number of people who hang their towels back on the rack? They decided, there were lots of different experiments actually, but the one that really interested me is they put this: 75% of people staying in this hotel hang their towel back on the rack to help the environment. And this increases the number who do it on any given night from 38% to 48%. Then they tried this experiment. 75% of people staying in your room hang their towel back on the rack during their stay. And this increased the number of people who did it, the proportion, from 38% to 58%. In other words, people were so anxious to do what other people were doing, to understand the social norm, that they tried to abide by it, even though this was of room 472 of a Holiday Inn somewhere in Virginia that they'd never met before, because their keenness was so strong. This is an incredibly strong feature of the way that we behave. If I said to you as a group about somebody, he looks like a geography teacher, you would all think to yourself, you know what, I think I do understand what he's really getting at. Well, how can someone look like a geography teacher? Come on. Well, the answer is twofold. If someone becomes a geography teacher, they slowly but surely begin to look like all the other geography teachers. This is because no one wants to stand out in the staff room, obviously, and look ridiculous. It's the reason why nobody came today wearing Speedos. You intuited that no one else would do that. Actually, I said that once and someone at the back goes, how do you know? It's true. And the other reason, of course, is that if you already look like a geography teacher, you're more likely to become one. Now, this I can see might leave some of you doubting my sanity, but it's true that a study of the American Dental Association suggested that people called dentists were more likely to become dentists than people chosen at random, and that people, and this is the people who live, who are called Florence are more likely to move to Florida, and people called Louise are more likely to move to Louisiana. Now these are small effects, but they're statistically significant, they're replicable, and they're not data trawling. So the interesting question is, what explains them? Well, before I go on to it, let me just a little small detour. Of course, if people behave like other people, this does have a policy consequence. So, for example, if we begin to talk about an obesity epidemic, what we're doing is encouraging everyone to be obese. I can be fat because everyone else is fat. That's a towel type of reaction. If you have a campaign that says, you know, Jeremy Paxman had this campaign, I tried to persuade him against it. He's seen lots of people winding down their window and throwing paper out of the window. Well, the obvious consequence of that is I'll do it because everyone else is doing it. They used to have a sign in the Arizona petrified forest which said, don't steal the petrified wood. If it goes on being stolen at this rate, there'll be none left. And people's reaction was, I better get mine now before it runs out. So there's a small policy consequence, and there's a political consequence too, because it means that when Tories complain about the BBC being left-wing, what we're doing is normalising left-wing behaviour at the BBC instead of isolating it, which is what we should do. But that isn't actually the reason, although it's interesting, and I can talk about that for another hour, it's not the reason why I raised the issue. The interesting question is, why do people behave like that? And here's the theory. Basically, we have to ask ourselves the question why we cooperate with people who don't share the same genes as us. Why do we're trying to replicate our genes? Why are we cooperating with people who don't share them? The reason is it's a good evolutionary strategy. If I do something for you and you do something back, it's a good evolutionary strategy to have that reciprocity. It's called, the biologists and social evolutionary psychologists call this reciprocal altruism. I do a favour for you, you do a favour for me. It's the root of free markets. A fair exchange is no robbery. It explains why people have strong opinions that are almost ineradicable about welfare fraud, about immigrants coming here and using the welfare system, about crime, about MPs' pay, about MPs' expenses, and about bankers' pay. This is all about feeling, I did something for you and you did not do it back. That you have been diddled in this fundamental evolutionary attitude we have of I do a favour for you, you do a favour for me. This is a massive asset for conservatism in one way, because it means the left were epically wrong about equality. Equality is not the social fairness norm. Reciprocity is the social fairness norm. This is the reason why I didn't understand markets. I do a favour for you, you do a favour for me. They mistook equality for the fairness norm because there often is an equality element in it, but it's by no means the whole story. But it also produces very difficult policy dilemmas. For example, if you agree that this is the fairness norm, it's possibly going to prove impossible to persuade people that you've ever done enough to tackle benefit fraud, since people are, from an evolutionary standpoint, believing that they're being diddled in this deal, and they always think that it's the case. And on public spending, they'll always think, I put in loads of taxes and I didn't get it out. It's very difficult to shake it. But I think the important thing from the optimist, liberal conservative standpoint is it does throw up a very serious problem of capitalism that we are about to enter into. The root of capitalism is, as a fairness norm, is I put in and I get out. That's a fair exchange is no robbery. The view that it works is all based upon the idea that people who don't get out are people who don't put in, and that's fine, but if you put in, you get out. If we go down the route of a more prosperous society in which an educated group who is capable of adding value to the economy is rewarded, and other people put in huge effort, see themselves as putting in, and then don't get out, that will offend against their fairness norm. And it's a very big challenge, because it will challenge the idea that capitalism is and a liberal market economy is fundamentally fair. Now, obviously, one way of tackling this is to take the money from those people who are creative and making money and who have got this education and try to give it to the other people. And as we're people who favour the welfare state and also some forms of in-work benefit, I don't think any of us would be offended by the principle of that. But our instinct, I'm sure that's your instinct, it's certainly mine, is there is a limit to that approach. At a certain point, the people who are creative and who are making lots of money will simply decide they don't want to pay for it, and they'll either have enough power to make that point politically, or they'll have enough disillusion to stop making the money that's making the system work, or they'll move. All of those possibilities suggest a limit to the idea that this is sort of 1% fallacy. You know, we'll just take all the money from all these Russians and they'll have to sell their yachts and they'll pay for it, never thinking about the fact that the yacht's on the ocean and it can sail away. And so the answer to the problem that is established by this fairness norm and by its relationship to capitalism can only be that we have to get more people to be able to add value to the economy. That ultimately their wealth has to depend on the value they add, and therefore the most urgent political task for us is to try to raise the educational standards of more and more people in the population, particularly in those areas which are going to yield more money in future, which is a sort of place where artistic creativity and mathematics meet. And our country is much stronger on artistic creativity than it is on mathematics. So that suggests that one of the big tasks for liberal conservatives is going to be to promote the study of science and maths and a cultural commitment to education. So that, done quite briefly, is the first, but I think the most important challenge. The other element of a sort of optimistic vision about this country becoming more prosperous is to recognise that Britain is becoming more urban because the world's becoming more urban. We've now passed through the point where 50% of people live in big urban areas. This is basically a good thing because people are wealthier, they are more productive, and most polls suggest they are happier. This does vary a bit from city to city in big city areas. It's obviously a very big political challenge for us. What happened after the 1987 election was was partly generational, but I think it was also partly geographical. The Conservative Party lost in all the big cities. And you know, the point that was made very interestingly before, I was very interested in that piece of analysis that you did, and I shall look forward to reading the pamphlet. Your point about Wigan, very powerful. The Conservatives been driven out of city areas, and then the power went to those people living outside cities, not in the growing parts of free market prosperous economies across the world. And it's very difficult for those people then not to be the representatives of precisely the least growing, least forward, least advanced and least advancing part of the country. And I think that the issue that UKIP raises is almost exactly the opposite of the one the Conservative Party needs to answer. Our problems are we don't have enough young people, we don't have enough ethnic minorities, we do not have enough people in prosperous rising cities. The problem in the European elections was we did really badly in London and we still were doing badly in the north. Of course there are issues about the Conservative base vote to address. Of course the people who think the country is going to the dogs is part of a Conservative coalition, and of course it's extremely difficult to bring those things together. But if you look at over a 10 to 15 year period what the Conservative Party's problems are, it's definitely going to be the cities issue rather than that of UKIP. So the Conservatives have to develop policies that are more popular in cities. This is a challenge for the right. If you think about cities as places where people come together, there are problems created by that proximity as well as opportunities. The problem created by that proximity, for example, are things like public health or the provision of roads and commuter services. It does the city living push you towards a certain kind of recognition of public services and their importance in possibly a way that more isolated living doesn't in the same way. So it does create a political challenge, but it also has there's an opportunity for a free market, open political party to take too, and it also suggests that we have to take issues like urban planning much more seriously and make sure that when we come to issues like planning and property, we're always for the people who don't have, as well as for those people who have it already. Another problem of optimism is we're going to become a society with better and better possibilities of healthcare and ways of extending people's lives. My wife's mother died not long ago of lung cancer. She lived for 6 years on the new drugs that can be developed. And that was an unknown thing. In fact, when we got to the end of it, we didn't know what the treatment course was because it was simply unknown. If you look at the development of technologies, without falling too much into the fallacy of extrapolation, which I recognise is an intellectual mistake, you have to think it's very, very likely that we're going to become more and more technologically advanced, and that things that we can barely conceive of will become technologically quite banal. And I noticed on Twitter the other day, which I retweeted, somebody holding on one finger a 2005 little chip which had 128 megabytes on it, and he had the same disk, the same size, and 128 gigabytes 10 years later. This is going to happen in all areas, but I think in healthcare it's going to become very important. The problem, of course, is that the costs and possibilities are going to keep rising, that the promise to everybody of providing them with all the health care that they might possibly want is going to become more and more expensive because the possibilities are going to become greater. And somehow or other, at some point, the Conservative Party is going to have to confront and solve the problem of how we relate to a free at the point of use National Health Service. In my view, that political solution cannot involve suggesting to people that we abolish the National Health Service. I wouldn't be in favour of that anyway on the grounds of insurance failings and looking at examples across the world, but I don't think it's going to be a solution. But if we're going to deal with the issue of cost, one possibility is to try to create a National Health Service tax that is hypothecated. And I've always been taught, hypothecated tax is totally unorthodox and nobody who's serious can really believe in it. And I set off reading it, assuming that at some point I would hit an incredible argument that would mean that I'd feel like an idiot proposing it. It would be like one of those things like complementary medicine, where you suddenly realise the whole thing's made out of water and you've made a fool of yourself. Well, actually, you don't ever hit that point with hypothecated tax receipts. There's although it is hard, admittedly, to identify what the tax is you're going to use, and there are technical difficulties with it, but lots of reputable people believe in that, and I certainly think there's a lot to be said for it. The idea of showing people explicitly what the cost is of National Health Service and of health costs seems to me quite attractive. A further challenge to us of an optimistic, growing economy. I think it's going to place a fundamental challenge to the Conservative Party itself as an organisation. If you look at the growth of political parties and ask yourself, when did the modern political party happen? It really happened towards the end of the 1800s. In other words, the growth of a national political party happened at almost exactly the same time as the growth of mass media. It was a connected phenomenon. I think there's a reason for that, which is that in a mass media, you have a limited amount of shelf space. You have to place your goods on this limited amount of shelf space. You have to organise yourself to make sure that happens. And so we had a sort of blockbuster era of political organisations in which things got more and more centralised and the message more and more uniform in order that you could place your ideas on this limited shelf space. The fact that mass media is being disintermediated will change the nature of political parties. And if you want to understand the rapidity with which that happened, just look at the stories that happened over the last few days over child abuse, which are being driven primarily by stories on the internet because the national newspapers can't stand them up. But nevertheless, the story's going. There's an idea that there's some sort of national cover-up. People are talking about it, and the mass media has been forced to follow that story, even though none of us actually know exactly what it is. You can see that sort of, if you watch it carefully, you'll see that kind of halting style as everyone kind of talks about something without actually knowing what they're talking about. And that is all to do with this incredible change of power. The expenses story was similar, so people were able to take the entire expenses accounts of the whole of Parliament and put it on a disc this big. That is a massive change in power. And I don't think centralised political parties or the current system we've got where we have a sort of long career generalists working in politics their whole life is going to and political party advisors being people who go in and out of professional organisations rather than working as individuals or consultants. I think that's going to change. So I think there's going to be a massive move towards much greater variety of political opinions, towards a much more fragmented political system with potential consequences for the way that Conservatives look at electoral organisation. We have a lot of big political challenges, but the most important one actually is just to argue robustly against a kind of hole-in-the-corner conservatism in which nothing is ever good enough, in which the best is the enemy of the good, and every person who does any job is useless, and everybody is betraying a kind of vague conservative sort of orthodoxy which nobody can quite define except by reference to something that happened 30 years ago. This organisation is critical in that. Funnily enough, in all the experiments on conformity, just one person saying that a piece of string is shorter than the other pieces of string can break a false conformity in which everybody else is saying the same thing just because everybody else is saying it. So the single group of people who say this is not the case, who challenge that message and that idea, can be very, very powerful. I think Bright Blue is among those people, those organisations which can provide that counter voice, which makes you a very important organisation, and I'm really pleased to have been invited to speak to you. Thank you. Absolutely.